They all turned it down. They said the mortality would be too high. You can't justify that amount of deaths to treat something like high blood pressure. And we said, what deaths? Oh, well, feed them. Some of them are going to die. So they're not going to die. We've been doing this. No, there's no safety study. Nobody's ever done a study showing safety. Fasting can be done safely. So we decided, okay, fine, we'll do a fast and safety study. But what a pain in the ass that was. So what we did is we collected all of the data from all of the patients that came in for 5 consecutive years. So every day, we took every patient and every symptom and manually entered their symptoms into a chart, which I'll show you here. This ultimately became the paper. Is fasting safe? A chart review of adverse events during medically supervised water-only fasting. We use the common terminology criteria for adverse events from the National Cancer Institute, which breaks all symptoms down into categories 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you have a category 5 event that day, that's because you died. You get a 5. If you have a life-threatening consequence, you get a category 4 event. If you have a severe event, you get a 3, moderate 2, mild 1. So every symptom of every patient for 5 years was coded based on this criteria. And we had 5,949 adverse events that occurred during 5 years of fasting in these patients. 4,482 of them were category 1, things like, headache, nausea, backache. Category 2s, they might have had dizziness or whatever the problems were. Category 3 events are more clinically significant. A third of these 300 significant events were hypertensive crises. That's any time your blood pressure is over 160. Now you might ask, why would fasting cause a hypertensive crisis if you're using fasting to treat high blood pressure? So the way it works is if your blood pressure comes in and you're 220, and the next day you're 200, and the next day you're 190, and the next day you're 180, and then you're 170, every one of those days is an adverse event. Because every day that your blood pressure is over 160, it doesn't matter if you started off at 300. Every day it's over 160, we have to record it as a category 1 adverse event. And a third of these were hypertensive crises, 97% of which were people that started out higher and were coming down. It wasn't normal blood pressure people developing hypertensive. But unless you read the fine print of how these things work, it's going to be very misleading. They say statistics don't lie, but liars use statistics. And I'm sure at some point somebody will review our work and say, oh, fasting is a danger for high blood pressure. Anyway, there was one category 4 event. This was a condition of hyponatremia. This person's blood sodium level went too low, and so we had to give them blood sodium in the form of intravenous fluid, give them a bag of fluid, and they were fine. And if your blood sodium gets too low and you don't catch it, it could become a life-threatening problem because you get all kinds of terrible symptoms and some essential nutrient. You got to have enough serum sodium. Normally it's fine. In this particular person, he had some kidney disease. He wasn't able to retain his sodium. His sodium went too low. We had to supplement the sodium. And ended up being fine. And there was no category 5 events, so no deaths. So the conclusions of this study were that the majority of adverse events are mild to moderate. The majority of adverse events are known to occur during fasting with respect to your low back pain, your headache, your rashes, all the things we talked about. There is a slight correlation between how many adverse events you have in aging, but no correlation between aging and severity of adverse events. Now, up until this study was done, no human subject committee in the country or world, for that matter, could authorize fasting in subjects over 65 years old. How many here are over 65? You'd be too old! Because there had been no safety study done, the concern is maybe older people would be more vulnerable to fasting. Well, it turns out there's no more likelihood because you're 75 than if you're 35 or 25 to have a severe adverse event. That's important because now Human Subjects Committee can approve fasting in all people, even older people, so long as they use the protocol at the TrueNorth Health Center. Which is why Dr. Longo in his book recently came out and said, don't do long-term fasting. It's much too dangerous. One caveat. If you do it at the TrueNorth Health Center, he still gets to go to heaven. Okay. Water-only fasting, as implemented here, is considered safe. So mechanisms of fasting. What percentage of people lose weight with fast? 100%? Sounds quacky, doesn't it? I had a woman one time who said she would not lose weight. I said, what do you mean you're not going to lose weight? She goes, no, she's been on every diet. She always gains weight. Every diet she gains weight. I said, what, are you going to violate the laws of physics and thermodynamics? And she said, yeah. She went on the fast. What happened the first day? She went up a pound. She was so excited. Oh, Dr. Goldhammer, even fasting I gained weight. See, she felt so vindicated. But she lost a pound a day like everybody else overall. But that first day she held a little fluid. And so the scale went up. Natriuresis is the selective elimination from sodium from the body. When we go on a fast, this is much more powerful than taking diuretics. The body gets rid of the salt. And with it goes the excess blood volume. So your blood pressure goes down, you pee a lot, you diurese, the non-healing wounds start to heal, the congestive heart failure starts to ease, the joint pain starts to ease, because you're holding all this extra fluid to neutralize the toxic sodium that you've been exposed to in excess quantity. And the body flushes that out very rapidly. That's why you see somebody with several pounds of weight right away. It's just fluid coming off because you're getting this excess salt out. Are people really toxic? Is this like real? If you took a fat biopsy and broke it down and analyzed it, would you find 200 different PCBs, dioxin, pesticides, mercury, heavy metals, drug residues? Is that real? You betcha. They do it in cadavers, they can do it in people. If you do a fat biopsy, you can analyze that. And it turns out that these materials come in from the water, from the air, but where does 90% of the average body load of a human being come from? If you take away smoking and taking drugs, what's the biggest behavior that people engage in that's responsible for their 90% of their total body load? Eating animal foods, biologically concentrated poisons from the environment that we feed, and we give the animals the drugs we give the animals, and it builds up in their tissues day after week after month until when you eat the animal, you get this entire lifetime accumulation of toxins in one mouthful. A calorie of plant foods can have, compared to a calorie of animal foods, the animal foods can have 2 to 1,000 times the concentration of toxins because of this biological concentration. So just not eating animal foods, not eating biologically concentrated poisons, may help lower total body loads. And in fasting, your body rapidly mobilizes and eliminates these products. That's why you don't feel so good sometimes. In fact, the metallic taste in the mouth, disgusting rashes, the discharges. In fact, some people have said don't ever, ever, ever do water fasting because the body will too rapidly detoxify itself. Unless you buy their proprietary products. Then apparently it's perfectly safe. They want to sell you pills to somehow neutralize. There's two kinds of toxins. One are endogenous, one are exogenous. Exogenous we've talked about. PCB, dioxin, pesticides, chemicals. Endogenous are normal intermediary products of metabolism. Things like cholesterol. Cholesterol is not a bad thing. It's a necessary component of the cell without which you die. It's just when there's too much of it and the blood vessels get plugged up and you have heart attacks and strokes, people don't like it. So the body rapidly mobilizes and eliminates toxins during fasting. And that's not just during fasting, but also in the time when you come off of fast. In fact, there's more detoxification sometimes in those initial days of refeeding than there was even during the fast. That's why it's so important that that period of time be done in a controlled setting, be done properly. You don't refeed aggressively, because then you wouldn't get quite as much benefit as you would have if you had done it properly. That's why we do the juice and then the raw food and the steam, and kind of take that time to come up. The other thing that prevents is you dying from refeeding syndrome. If you have a person on a very long fast, particularly as you get over 3 and 4 weeks, in that 30, 40-day range, if you take that person and refeed them aggressively, you can shut their system down with something called refeeding syndrome. We don't see that here because we don't do refeeding inappropriately. That eliminates that risk. And we've done it 20,000 times, but I do get people that are, you see these cases where they do some fasting on their own and then they end up in the hospital because they refeed too aggressively. And they get into this refeeding syndrome. Enzymatic induction. Enzyme systems are necessary for detoxification. That's how the toxins get out of your body. Your body produces enzymes. And also you need enzymes to mobilize macronutrients like glycogen or fat. How do you think you burn fat? You have to use enzymes to break those through a process called lipolysis to break the fat down and burn it. Well, every time you induce what's called inducing those enzyme systems, you catalyze their production. You streamline them, they get better and better and better. They persist for example, if you're an athlete and you go out and run every day, you get better and better at mobilizing glycogen stores. Glycogenolysis is enzymatically driven, and you have more of these glycogen mobilizing enzyme system pathways if you're an athlete, because the exercise forces your body to have to mobilize those glycogen stores, and it gets better at it. Same thing happens in fasting. You get better at mobilizing glycogen stores, better at mobilizing fat stores, better at mobilizing detoxification pathways. And so the idea is every time you fast, it accumulates, it carries over. You get better and better at it. That's why intermittent fasting, even at 16 hours, even though it's just a little bit, when you do it 365 times a year, may have a fairly profound effect. And certainly long-term fasting, like we're doing here, 5 to 40 days, has a profound effect. And you will see in patients that have done fasting, they do fasting every year or whatever, it gets better and better, easier and easier. Some of it's their total body load of toxins is probably much lower. But some of it's because they're actually forcing these pathways that would normally have been forced naturally. Because humans never ate 365 days a year. Spring comes late sometimes. There's nothing to eat in a natural setting. In fact, most humans born on the planet never lived to reproduce because they starved it or they got killed by predation. It's only the real successful ones that managed to do it, and they still had to fast by force, not by choice. Enzymatic reduction induced by fasting, induced by exercise, persists, and you get better and better at it. Insulin is a hormone that drives sugar from the bloodstream into the cells where it's needed to be burned for fuel. What would happen if your insulin couldn't be transported into your cells and you build up in your bloodstream? And what would we call that? Diabetes mellitus. That's all it is. Diabetes is just the inability to transfer insulin from the bloodstream into the cells because of insulin resistance. Fasting reverses insulin resistance. There are no medications that reverse insulin resistance. Insulin doesn't do it. It just drives more. It tries to drive more sugar across the cell. Glucophage, these diabetes meds, they don't reduce insulin resistance. They're just trying to force more sugar into the cells. Fasting and also exercise reduces insulin resistance. In fact, you'll find everything that exercise does, fasting does, which is weird. Why would all these biomarkers that change with exercise also change with fasting? With exercise, you're out there vigorously exercising. Fasting, we don't even let you move around. How could it be doing the same thing? It's because both exercise and fasting are reversing the consequence of dietary excess.
Of what?
They're reversing the consequences of dietary excess. You burn fat when you exercise, you burn fat when you fast, you get rid of the consequences of the dietary excess that caused the stupid problems to begin with. You don't get metabolic syndrome if you're not getting dietary excess. You don't get dietary excess unless you fool the brain into overeating with salt, oil, and sugar. It's the pleasure trap. It doesn't exist unless you create that environment. Fasting undoes the consequences, exercise undoes the consequences. That's why people that eat well, exercise, periodically fast, appear to do a whole lot better than the people that just spend all their time eating. The gut is a tunnel through the body. If you swallow something, is it in your body?
No.
You swallowed it. Disappeared, but is it in your body? It's not in your body yet. It's going through a tunnel that goes through your body. There is a tunnel that connects your mouth to a hole at the other end called the anus. And it goes down your throat, through the small intestine, the large intestine, into the rectum. But digestion is essentially shoving stuff in one hole and then trying to push it out the other hole. Okay? It does not get in your body just because it's going through the digestive system unless it gets absorbed through the intestinal mucosa, which works like the screen works to keep flies out. If I open the window and the screen is intact and the fly is bigger than the holes in the screen, the fly doesn't get in, does it? But what happens if the screen is damaged? Could the flies get through? Same thing in your gut. Nothing gets through the intestinal mucosa. Even a protein molecule is too big to fit through the intestinal mucosa, unless the intestinal mucosa is damaged through a process that allows a process called gut leakage. Stuff leaks through. And when the stuff leaks through, your body's immune system reacts and you're fine. The neutrophil phagocytes eat it up and get rid of it. But what if it keeps happening? In genetically vulnerable people, some people's immune system becomes challenged and confused. And some of those people's immune systems will begin to attack its own tissues and fail to differentiate foreign tissues from self tissues. Autoimmune, self-immune. And if it attacks the colon, we call it Crohn's disease or ulcerative attacks the joints, we call it rheumatoid or osteoarthritis. If it attacks the skin, we call it vasculitis. Or if it attacks the kidneys, we might call it lupus. Okay, so all these, asthma, if it's the lungs, etc. So all of these conditions are essentially your immune system attacking your tissues. And we put itis after it, give it a Greek name. And then what's the medical treatment? Well, since your immune system is attacking your tissues, the medical approach is, let's shut down the immune system. So we give you prednisone or methotrexate, drugs that are designed to shut the immune system down. And at first it's like a dream, because you get out of pain. And then it becomes a nightmare, because it turns out you need your immune system. And when you turn off the immune system, as you do when you take long-term steroids, you get consequences down the road that could be far worse than the disease that you're trying to mitigate. What we try to do, instead of shutting the immune system down, is we try to stop the gut leakage with fasting. During fasting, the gut heals. We know that because acute vasoreactive proteins come down, the evidence is that the gut heals. And then we stop doing the things that cause the gut leakage. What's the best way to cause gut leakage? What's the single best thing you can do to cause gut leakage? It also causes smoker's face.
Oxidation?
What causes smoker's face?
Smoking.
Smoking.
Oh.
Yeah, smoking. What are wrinkles? Wrinkles are cross-linked collagen tissue, prematurely aged collagen tissues caused by free radicals from smoking. Does smoking only affect the face? No, it affects all the tissues in the body, including the inside of your blood vessels, which are called the animal lining, and it causes damage there that allows fatty plaques to build up so you get clots and strokes and heart attack. Some people say that smoking actually protects people from lung cancer. It's protective. Think about this. Only 20% of smokers get lung cancer. 80% of smokers never get lung cancer. Therefore, smoking essentially is protective against lung cancer because it kills those people from heart disease before they live long enough to grow their tumors. If you could make cigarettes more toxic so everybody died of heart disease, could they advertise it as being cancer safe? Could you say, ooh, smoke our brand of cigarettes. We guarantee you'll die of heart disease, and therefore it'll protect you from lung cancer. Wouldn't that be good? So smokers prematurely age their face and their blood vessels and their tissues, and so they die premature death. About 8 years come off from smoking. But what if you didn't want to smoke because it's so disgusting? What else could you do to bathe your body with free radicals, so much so that it leads to fatty liver infiltrate, cirrhosis of the liver? What's behavior? Alcohol, including red wine, including organic red wine. Okay? Alcohol causes the peroxidation of alcohol causes massive free radical formation, which is why you get that cirrhotic liver and fatty liver infiltrate. And of course it affects all the bodies, cells of the body too. Yeah, alcohol. It also is like liquid fat. Alcohol has 7 calories per gram. Fat only has 9 calories per gram. So alcohol has almost twice as many calories per gram, which is why if you drink alcohol, you get that really attractive beer belly. Yeah. Or the plumber's crack. Chicks dig that. Yeah, that's why they make the jeans right up 2 inches higher now, because the women were just going crazy. So that's why alcohol is so good at getting fat. No fiber, no negative, no feedback to the satiety mechanisms. And you can just drink it up there and just shove it right in there. It's great. So what if you didn't want to smoke or drink, but you still wanted free radicals? Because you didn't want to be left out. Well, animal foods are fabulous sources of free radicals, or any kind of fat, particularly heated fats like oils, or the foods cooked with oil like breads and crackers and cookies, and all that stuff in the grocery store. Okay? So fats, animal products, alcohol, tobacco, yeah, more of the cream in the coffee than the coffee itself. I can talk about coffee, but that's not exactly the mechanism.
What about cannabis?
About which?
Cannabis.
Oh, fabulous. Yeah, in fact, cannabis is even better than cigarettes in a way because the THC narcotizes the psyllium in the lungs. So the stuff not only gets in there, but it can just sit there and pool and fester. The best is to combine cigarettes and cannabis. Because then you get the stuff in, you breathe it in nice and deep, you put to sleep all the little hair-like structures that are used to get rid of debris, and then the cigarette smoke can get in there and just sit and fester. So you get a much higher incidence of disease if you combine the two. The autonomic nervous system controls all the things in the body that you don't think about. If you went out running and your heart didn't speed up, it's a probability you would die. Do people die because they forget to tell their heart to speed up? You ever forgot to tell your heart to speed up? No, you don't even think about it, do you? It does it automatically. And the automatic or autonomic nervous system is what controls that. And the autonomic nervous system has two branches, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, and they work in contrast to each other to keep everything balanced. If your sympathetic tone gets too high, you could have something like constipation. People that have constipation, their peristalsis doesn't move properly, it's because the sympathetic tone is too high. Or if your parasympathetic tone got too high, it could be diarrhea. So we've discovered these healing systems that are designed to rebalance the autonomic nervous system. Like, have you ever wondered, how does massage and biofeedback and yoga and acupuncture and chiropractic manipulation, how do all these things work? We have studies that show that people get less pain and symptoms and it helps them feel better. But what are they doing? Well, they're balancing the autonomic nervous system. That's the main mechanism by which these therapies actually work. Some are more powerful or work better than others, but bottom line is that's basically why people legitimately do feel better after they engage in these natural therapies. What's the most powerful way of rebalancing the autonomic nervous system? It works like if you have a corrupted hard drive and you reboot the hard drive, you know how it sometimes starts, you don't know why, but now it starts working again, because it clears out all that debris. That's what fasting does to the human organism. It's like rebooting the hard drive in a corrupted computer. It's more powerful than anything else that I've seen at recalibrating autonomic function. Psychospiritual. Isn't it interesting? You get all these religions out there, right? The Jews, the Jains, the Hindus, the Muslims, the Christians. They're killing each other in the street. They fight over everything, but there's one thing they all agree on: fasting. Every major religion has a tradition about fasting, both usually for mental, spiritual, but also for physical health reasons. And so if you know, Moses, David, Elijah, Jesus fasted up to 30 days. I actually had a guy call and said, "You fast people for 40 days?" Yeah, up to 40 days. Do you also teach people to part the Red Sea? Tell them it's all in the wrist. The immune system is enhanced, not suppressed during fasting. Every objective measure of immune system function, helper killer T cell activity, neutrophil phagocytosis, lysosomal activities. The lysosomes are little structures in your cells that eat up the cancer cells, the denatured cells, all enhanced during fasting, not suppressed. And taste and interpretation, we already covered this. Remember my union guy with the hamburger, right? Why did the food go from disgusting, tasteless swill that he thought getting shot in the head with his 12 gauge would be preferable to have to choke down that tasteless swill, changed to being not bad? Something changed. And we did a study measuring exactly that. Dr. Myers figured out a way to detect minimum detection threshold of salt and sugar in humans. And we administered that, and we did the fast, and we re-administered it. We have a study that will be coming out in another month or so that shows for the first time that you can actually change your palate. Palate changes in response to fasting quickly and more slowly with dietary changes.
Yeah, I was reading that there's an epidemic of fatty liver disease in this country.
Right.
Will this diet clear it up?
Well, the body's amazingly forgiving, but you do have to eat the food long enough to actually lose the weight. And so you have fatty liver because people are drinking alcohol and eating high fructose corn syrup, a heavily federally subsidized sugar that processes in the liver much like alcohol does. And it's the sugar they put on your soda pops and your fast food that's really, really cheap. And so that now we've got people, the average consumption of sugar in this country is now 150 pounds a year per person. Now I don't eat any, which means somebody's eating my share too. Okay, so summary. Fasting decreases glucose and insulin. It decreases insulin growth factor 1. IGF-1, the lower your IGF-1, the lower your risk of dying. It's one of those markers that they've identified. What else lowers IGF-1 besides fasting? Exercise. People that exercise live longer and have lower IGF-1. Fasting decreases leptin, which is a marker of inflammation. It decreases blood pressure, heart rate. mTOR. mTOR is a mammalian target of rapamycin. It's downregulated by something called AMPK. And it limits protein synthesis and increases autophagy. In other words, the higher the mTOR, the lower your autophagy, the lower your white blood cells' ability to eat up cancer and debris. The lower your mTOR, the more autophagy is kicking in. And so fasting induces metabolic changes that enhances autophagy, which may be why our cancer patients seem to be doing better. It decreases total microbial load and has, we believe, a rebooting effect. We've done a study, we completed this with Washington University, Luigi Fontana, where we actually took 21 subjects, we measured all these things before, and then we retested them after, including with gut, stool samples, looking at the gut microbiome. And they measured the number of, they can measure in lymphocytes the number of, I'm blanking on the word right now. There's a little organelle inside the lymphocytes, and they correlate well with cancer and aging. And they're actually measuring the changes in fasting.
Ribosomes?
It's not ribosomes, it's another one. I'll come back, I'll think of it. Fasting decreases IL-6, TNF-alpha, and decreases inflammation, oxidation in general. So we know these effects are happening in fasting. We know that fasting increases adenopectin and ghrelin, which are involved with insulin sensitivity and satiety. That's why after fasting, you think you'd be ravenously hungry, and yet you'll find it's relatively easy to be satiated. Yes?
When you speak about fasting effects, are you just speaking about the 5 to 40 day, or are you also speaking about intermittent fasting?
Well, it turns out that even the 16-hour fasting you do at night may have a subtle effect on these variables. So exactly how much is to be determined, because there's been a limited amount of research. Most of it's been done in animal studies. We're actually the first and only place doing long-term water fasting and its effect. And I tried to do, when the people from Longo's group was here asking about doing studies, we wanted to do a head-to-head comparison. We compare doing intermittent with water fasting. That's not what they're interested in. They want to do water fasting, but then use intermittent fasting as a maintenance kind of thing. I don't think anybody wants to do head-to-head with water-only fasting because it's going to kick us, Anyway, fasting increases what's called PGC1 alpha, which is peroxidome proliferate activated receptor, which increases mitochondrial biogenesis. What that means is the mitochondria are the energy production components of the cells. When you fast, this marker goes up, and that's what induces the body to make more mitochondria. And that may be why some of the patients with chronic fatigue and some of the other stuff may be impacted, because literally you're changing mechanisms. BHB is beta-hydroxybutyrate. That's the main fuel that's being burned by the brain during fasting. Instead of burning sugar, you're being burning this BHB. And BHB increases BDNF. BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. They took rats in a cage. Everything's equal, except that one rat gets a little wheel so it can exercise, and the other rat can't exercise. And if they give them a wheel, they'll exercise. And then they noticed that there was a huge difference between those two rats. Even though they're genetically bred rats, fed exactly the same, everything's the same except one can exercise. The ones that exercised didn't get dementia. They could navigate these things, they didn't lose their cognitive capacity. So they tested and they found out the rats that were exercising had a massive increase in brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is induced by exercise. And that protected them against Alzheimer's, essentially rats' Alzheimer's. Guess what else increases BDNF? Fasting. Fasting and exercise. Fasting increases dramatically, your whole brain changes to running beta-hydroxybutyrate, and that induces a whole bunch of BDNF production. People that periodically are fasting are having more BDNF, and even intermittent fasting may result in increased BDNF production, and maybe one of the factors associated with protecting us from an aging brain. Insulin sensitivity increases. Insulin goes down, but insulin sensitivity goes up, which means your insulin starts working better. And cellular stress adaptation and resistance, that was the rat study by Longo, where the healthy rats, the cancer rats, when they're fasted, survive better, do better. Cellular stress resistance and cellular stress adaptation. Healthy cells are protected and cancer cells are more vulnerable. Increased autophagy. So this is such a big deal, this fasting autophagy. They awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2016 to this guy, Yoshinori Oshumi. Yoshinori Oshumi looked at fasting autophagy and got the Nobel Prize for the importance of autophagy. I mean, they realized this is a really, really important deal. And of course, they're thinking, what drug can they do? Because what they're trying to do is come up with what's called fasting mimic drugs. That's who's funding the research on fasting right now. Pharmaceutical companies wanting to come up with a drug that does exactly what fasting does, without that nasty fasting. Not practical. But if you could get the body to do what it does when you do fasting, by taking a pill, it would be worth a lot of money. And that's where a lot of this financing is coming from, is the great desire to figure out a fasting mimicking drug. Fasting normalizes the gut microbiome, it stimulates B-cell immunity, it reverses all abnormalities associated with metabolic syndrome.
How does it, what's the mechanism for normalizing the gut microbiome?
We don't know. We've done the first study looking at that with Luigi Fontana. I haven't seen the data back yet. They won't release the data to us until they publish the actual paper, because they're afraid we might go backdoor and start publishing our own data. And they're slow and inefficient, so that would not be good. So they want to be able to take credit for it, and then we'll get the data. So, why did that happen? Why are we in a position like that? Well, at the time that we did that study, we didn't have a lab, we didn't have an IRB, we didn't have any money, and we didn't have any researchers. So since then, we hired Tasha Myers, our director of research, who's a PhD postdoc from Columbia University, who was a basic science bench researcher. She got disgusted with the politics of research, decided she had to quit, and then saw our newsletter where we announced that we had an opening for a researcher, and moved out here from Ohio to join our staff to do something worthwhile with her life. And she's a really brilliant. First thing she did was she helped us write the first paper, which went into the British Medical Journal, and she's been doing just fabulous work since then. So we hired her, and then she helped us get a federally chartered IRB, human subject committee, put together that we sponsored, and we got federal-wide assurance. So now we have a federally chartered IRB, which means we can approve not only our own studies, but we can approve anybody's studies. But we've populated it with people that are knowledgeable about fasting. And so they're not terrified that everybody's going to die because they're ignorant of religion. These are people that know fasting. And so they tend to be more favorable. Although their job is to protect human subjects, they're not terrified of the fasting part of it itself. So that's worked out well, because now we can get studies approved. We formed with the generous donations from some of our patients, we built a BSL-2 lab in the foundation building upstairs. That means we have hood, extraction, 86 below refrigeration, a refrigerated centrifuge, and a team of researchers, including some of you have met Eve, who's here. She's got a PhD in biochemistry, who's joined us, And we've got another physician coming March 15, who was an intern that's come back to join us on the research stuff. So we have this team of people, as well as a bunch of remote researchers that are working with us, and affiliations with universities, including the Buck Institute here in Nevada, Washington University, one of the largest human subjects research facilities in the world. We've got Texas A&M, the medical school at Texas A&M that happens to be the guy that's in charge of the functional medicine program, came here, got well, and now those students can rotate here as part of their training in functional medicine for a month as part of going through the school. We have UC Davis, a researcher there. We've got a number of these. Oh, and now the study that some of you have participated in here with the Mayo Clinic, and the big clinic in Minnesota. Well, one of their neurologists happens to be a Harvard neurologist, came here, got well, took it back, and we've done this study that's primary prevention of stroke. And we look at all these biomarker changes before and after the stroke. But now we separate the samples, we freeze them, we ship them off to various labs, so we're not vulnerable to the whims of the research institutions who have other agendas in mind. So now we can design the study, get the study approved federally. We can conduct the actual research with our human subject laboratory. We can extract the samples. The next step is we'd like to be able to purchase a plate reader, which would allow us to actually do the processing of the samples in-house rather than having to send those out. That'll dramatically cut their costs. So we have to raise about $100,000 to do that. Once we get the plate reader, and all of the lab that we run, we can do in-house. We won't even have to send out the standard lab. We'll be able to do it upstairs with the team. And we can write the papers. Dr. Myers is really good technical writer. And we have our facilities manager. Some of you might have met Ryan Bradley. He's now went back to school, got his PhD in research stats, and now he's able to do our research statistics, so we can run all of our own analyses, and he's brilliant. And the only challenge left is getting published in U.S. journals. You notice a lot of our journals are British journals. In Britain, they do something. They de-credentialize the authors of the paper. They send the paper to the reviewers just to review it on the strength of the paper, not who it was that was sending it in. So the reviewers don't know that you're some chiropractic quack from California. They just read the paper. In the U.S., some of our papers get rejected the day they get mailed because the secretary can see where they're coming from. They won't even know what the envelope. And so we've had trouble getting into these mainstream U.S. journals because they don't like people like us publishing papers regardless of the paper. So what we've done is we've partnered with Mayo Clinic, Blood Institute, Washington. Those guys are publishing everywhere, and so we'll come in backdoor that way. So that's really what the strategy is in that. And we don't really care about publishing credit or any of that. I just know as long as the data is getting published, it's going to be okay. So according to Walter Longo, published 2015 Journal of Metabolism, combination of fasting and chemotherapy results in dramatically higher cancer risk survival than chemotherapy alone. This is a case report that we published. This was the first case report we published with Dr. Myers. This was a 42-year-old female diagnosed with follicular lymphoma stage 3. They'd done an excisional biopsy. They tracked this patient for 2 years. Her tumors kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You could feel them externally, upper and lower extremity. It got to the point that even her doctor said, look, you have to go to the med school now. It's time to do chemotherapy, even though chemotherapy is not that great. You know, you don't have any choice. And she said, what if I change my diet? And he said, it doesn't matter. Diet is not related to lymphoma cancer. You just eat whatever you want. And she said, what if I went on a water-only fast? And he said, no, that's criminal quackery. So she went to the medical school. The doctor at the medical school, the oncologist, told her that diet didn't matter. She could do whatever she wanted as long as she didn't lose weight. And that fasting was so because she had that tremendous medical support, she decided to come here. And she underwent 21 days of water-only fasting. During that 21 days, her tumors completely disappeared. So we could no longer feel any evidence of her tumors. She fed for 10 days. She went from 174 to 152 during fasting, which is about what you'd expect a pound a day. And then at 2 months, she was at 139. How did she go from 152 to 139 2 months after she left here? Eating right. She ate a whole plant food, SOS-free diet. I told her she had to stick strictly to the diet or it could be fatal because I would track her down and kill her. And she believed me, and she stuck to the diet. She went back to the medical school. They told her, wow, this is amazing. The guy examined her, and he couldn't find the tumors either. And he looked at the chart, he's looking at her, he's looking at the picture, he's looking at the examiner again. Then he finally said, what happened? And she said, well, I went to the criminal quacks, and all the tumors went away. And he said, that's amazing. He said, I'll have to give them a call. He says, but meanwhile, your white count is still too low. Let's do some gentle chemotherapy. And she said, no, I don't want to do chemotherapy. I want to see if it'll correct on its own. And she said, I'd like to get a CT scan. And he said, you don't need a CT scan. You're better now. And she said, but she wants to objectify the change. And then he got kind of nervous. He said, you don't need to objectify any change. I've been doing this 25 years. I'm telling you, you're better now. And I don't know where she got the idea to do this, but she said, what if there's cancer lurking just beneath the surface? And then he said, okay, fine, I'll do a CT scan. So he does the CT scan, does the before, that's the after. Before and after. And so then now we've tracked her for 12 months. So at 12 months, she has no cancer, doing good, she's sticking to the diet. I thought, okay, we're going to submit this as a case report. So I called John McDougall up. You all know John McDougall, right? How many people know John McDougall? Right? It's a real friendly, easy to get along with guy. So I said, hey, John, I've got this patient with lymphoma, and we've got a 12-month follow-up. And he says, yeah, but do you have any objectives? And I said, yeah, I've got the pre-post CT scans. And he goes, how'd you get him to do that? We got it. He says, okay. I said, I want to send it to the British Medical Journal. He said, don't do that. That's a mistake. They'll never publish it. It's a waste of time. He said he submits articles there. They always reject it. They're a bunch of assholes. So, given his sage experience and advice, I, of course, immediately sent it to the British Medical Journal. And after some back and forth, they eventually published the paper. And the best part is I was able to call John up and say, hey, John, remember that case with lymphoma? Yeah. they published it in the British Medical Journal. I said, I don't believe it. That's amazing. I don't understand. And I said, I think they like chiropractors. He says, no, they don't. So anyway, they published this paper, but they said, look, 10% of lymphoma patients go through periods of remission, spontaneous remission. Maybe they just got lucky. Yeah, it was getting worse for 2 years, and the 21 days complete result doesn't look like it, but maybe it was. You need to follow this patient for 3 years, and then we need you to submit a follow-up to see whether or not it persists. Because even if it was spontaneous remissions tend to relapse or recur. So we said, okay, we'll do that. And so we tracked her for 3 years. And at 3 years, she was 136 pounds, so she had maintained her weight loss, right? Still under the threat of death. She had no signs of cancer, and we did a full body CT.
CT PET?
Not just CT.
Just CT.
Full body CT.
CT.
No evidence of cancer. Her oncologist, same guy. I forgot to tell you. One of the reasons they were resistant to publishing our case originally, they said, look, you don't have the oncologist signed on. Why hasn't the oncologist signed on? So I wrote to the oncologist and I said, dear Dr. So-and-so, thank you so much for all the support you've shown in referring your patient to the TrueNorth Health Center for medically supervised water-only fasting. And as I'm sure you expected and anticipated, your patient's gone into full remission, and, as you know. And now that we've got this paper accepted for review at the British Medical Journal, we'd like you to sign on as co-author in the study. Okay? So we sent him that at 1 year, but he didn't respond. He must have been busy. So now at 3 years, we sent him another letter because he tells her, whatever you're doing, just keep doing it. And so we said, we'd like you to sign on as co-author of the
You're going to do it?
No, I haven't heard from him yet. Maybe at 10 years he'll sign it. But anyway, so we send this in to the British Medical Journal at their invitation, and they reject it. Because one of the reviewers said, oh, she's probably just lucky. And so we appeal it, and then the editor overrides his reviewers, and then they publish it. So they did publish the second follow-up. So this is follow-up of water-only fasting and an exclusively plant food diet in the management of stage 3 low-grade follicular lymphoma. And so now we have a 4-year follow-up, and she continues to do well, still under the threat of death. So hope that she'll continue to comply. Now, since then, since we published that paper, we had a bunch of lymphoma patients in there. And now we've gotten some follow-up data on others. In fact, I'm waiting this week for the, apparently, we haven't seen the actual scan, but apparently it's very favorable. And the tumors have clearly gone down. So we've got at least one more really good, with follow-up, long-term outcome. And so once we get 3 or 4 of those into what's called a cohort, we'll then be able to try to do a clinical trial. Now there's going to be huge resistance to us doing a clinical trial, say with the med school, because if they do a clinical trial and it turns out it works, these aren't just random coincidences, then what happens is they have to offer fasting as an option. And that is going to be really inconvenient. Oh my God, it's just going to be a nightmare. So they're going to do everything possible to poo-poo that, because that's going to be really annoying for people doing it. But the chance of one person being in spontaneous remission is about 1 in 10. The chance of 2 consecutive would be 1 in 100. The chance of 3 is about 1 in 1,000. Eventually, you get enough cases, it gets really hard. We just get lucky every time. In fact, I think we should change the name of our clinic to Spontaneous Remission. I actually wanted to get one of those signs from the Environmental Protection Agency that said toxic waste dump. Yeah. Here's another case. This is a woman you may meet. She lives, in the neighborhood. She was a dentist. She was at a dental conference outside, got hit in the head with a pole, got a traumatic brain injury, and developed a headache, which isn't surprising. The problem is the headache never went away. They think she had a dural tear, she got some inflammation. 16 years of constant daily headache, completely disabled, couldn't work, couldn't do her profession. Comes in for a 40-day fast, we're going to see what happens. Goes through 40 days of fasting. By the 19th day, for the first time in 16 years, she had 5 minutes with no pain. She said she woke up and she thought, what is that sensation? Oh, no pain. It only lasted 5 minutes and the pain came back. But by the end of 40 days of fasting, she was mostly out of pain. And we were going to break her fast, but she wouldn't break her fast. She said she wanted to do just 1 more day. And I said, why 1 more day? She said, because the men fast for 40 days. Moses, David, Elijah, Jesus. She said women always have to do just a little bit. So fast for 41 days, broke her fast. She still had some prodrome, not headache, but something didn't feel quite right. We refed her for 6 months, rebuilt her, and then brought her back in to fast again for 40 days. She did a second 40-day fast. By the end of the second fast, she was out of pain completely. We have now a 7-year follow-up. She's been without headache for 7 years. And this was published in the paper. Challenging case, clinical practice, long-term relief from chronic post-traumatic headache after water-only fasting and an exclusively plant foods diet. The reason I keep saying that is they always tell you don't talk about the diet when you try to submit these papers, because it's bad enough you're doing fasting. They don't want to hear about this plant food, vegetarian food. They don't want to hear about that. And it'll reduce your risk of publishing. So we always put the diet in big bold letters, just to piss them off. This is a case, a non-pharmacologic, that is no drug, conservative management of uncomplicated subacute appendicitis. This guy came in with appendicitis, totally needed surgery, CT confirmed,